Hey, it's Ryan with this week's Mille Lacs fishing report. Main lake water temps are right about 60 degrees. The bays are getting into the mid 60s. We'll get started this week with the Muskie report. There were some fish caught this last weekend. It was Muskie opener. There were a lot of people out on the lake, so it stands to reason that a few fish were boated. I think if I were going to be going into this next weekend, there's two baits that I'd be focused on mainly, and that would just be regular bucktails, normal size bucktails. I wouldn't necessarily go with anything giant. They'll still work at this time, but just a normal bucktail is a great choice at this time of year. Or would be a plopper style topwater bait. Either one of those baits work great early in the season. It's still fairly cool outside. We've had some cool days lately. We had some really hot temperatures, some hot days, but now it's cooled down. So I think there's still going to be plenty of fish around in the bays. But those are the two baits that I would use. I would focus a lot of my attention in the shallows or in the bays. There should still be fish in those areas. Move on to the walleye bite. There's still a lot of fish in shallow. I'm seeing them when I'm smallmouth fishing. We're seeing them in very shallow water. I've heard reports as little as 3 feet of water or so. Some guys are seeing them. But myself, we've been seeing them and catching them in that 8 to 12 feet of water still. There's a lot of fish in the shallows. Whenever you're looking for fish in the shallows, it can be a little hit or miss. But typically when you find them, the bite's very good. So if you're in shallow and you have some overcast conditions like we have behind me right now, a little chop on the water, I would focus a lot of my attention in that 8 to 12 foot of water range. If it gets slack, calm, and hot and sunny, you might need to back off the shallows and go out a little deeper. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't catch them in the shallows, but sometimes that makes it a little more difficult. If it gets like that, I would go out to the gravel bars or I'd go out to the mud flats. There's a lot more fish appearing out there. We're getting more and more bug hatches, and that's going to continue as we get farther into the summer. But there's more fish appearing out there as well. So fish the edges of the mud flats during the day, that 28 foot of water range, whether it's an edge or a point on a mud flat, those are great options. A Lindy rig and a leech is one of my favorite ways to fish the mud flats. My other favorite way of fishing them is just a bobber and a leech. With today's new forward-facing sonar and that technology, you can scan the flats. When you find fish, you can put a bobber and a leech right on them. A lot of times when it's slick, calm outside, it's a great way to get fish. The other thing is the gravel bars. A night crawler and a spinner is a great way to cover water on the gravel bars. The gravel bars are kind of featureless, so a lot of times you're trying to cover water on those rock to gravel transitions in that 30-foot depth range during the day. So a crawler and a spinner, you can cover a lot of water. You can find aggressive fish pretty quickly. When you get into the evening on the gravel bars, I'd move right up on top. I would go to the very top of the gravel bar, or I would find anywhere on top of the gravel bar where you can find some scattered rock. Those seem to be the sweet spots for the evening bobber bite. On the mud flats, the sweet spots for the evening bobber bite tend to be like points or inside turns or little cuts that run up the flats. But whatever main feature you can find on the flat, those tend to be the sweet spots in the evening for the bobber bite. As with the rocks, the mud, and the gravel, there's an evening bobber bite going on all three. If you have a favorite rock pile, just get out there at sunset, put out a bobber and a leech. You'll probably catch some fish. Same goes for the mud and gravel. When it comes to the mud and gravel, however, I tend to approach it a little bit differently. Instead of just having my favorite spot, sometimes I may drive around a little bit more and use my electronics to try to find a concentration of fish. Moving on to the smallmouth bite, there's a lot of fish on beds. There's still a lot of pre-spawn fish out on Mille Lacs at this time, but we are really in the middle of spawn. There's been fish spawning in the bays for a while at this point. There's a lot of fish spawning in the shallows in the main lake in that 3 to 5 foot of water, some of them getting down in that 7 foot of water. But we still have a lot of spawn to go. There's still a lot of time left for that. I would expect that it's going to be continuing at its peak here for another week or so before it really starts to wane down. That's my guess. That's my best guess. I don't know for sure, but just looking at the weather, we're kind of in a little bit of a stale period at this time, so I would expect this to continue for another week or so before we start to really see things wane. But anyway, the beds are doing really well. If you're looking for pre-spawn fish, I'm still finding schools of them very shallow up in sandy area, sand to rock transitions, and that 2 to 5 foot of water range. There's still a lot of fish up there cruising around. The other places I'm finding them are just in the usual spots around large boulders, large rock spines, rock to gravel transitions in that 6 to 8, 12 foot of water range. So there's still plenty of pre-spawn fish. There's a lot of fish on beds right now, so whether you like to target one versus the other, there's plenty of opportunity for both. If you're going for the pre-spawners, my two favorite techniques are either going to be the little swim bait, or at this point a Ned rig is a good choice as well. If I'm going right for the bedded fish, the two techniques that I'm going to go for are either going to be the drop shot or the Ned rig. And if you're using baits on the beds, green pumpkin's my favorite color, but if you want to be able to see your bait on the beds, go with something white, because white really stands out. It's easy to find your bait on the bed and make sure you're in the middle of it, because that's where you're going to get hit. So those are the baits of choice, and I expect good things to continue. It's been great out here. We've been having a lot of fun on the walleyes and the smallmouth. I've been hearing good things on the muskies. I hope these tips help you out. Good luck fishing. Have a great weekend.